The courtroom fell into a suffocating silence. Not because justice had been served, but because something far more disturbing had just taken place. Judge Meredith Langston, draped in her black robe of supposed impartiality, leaned forward, her voice slicing the air like cold steel. You people always find yourselves here, don't you? Standing before real Americans, expecting mercy. The room shifted, some flinched, others froze. But one man didn't move. Not an inch. He stood steady, eyes locked forward, not with anger, but something quieter, heavier, what no one knew was that in exactly 7 minutes, the balance of power would turn. His name was Elijah Brooks, 41 years old, a former Marine turned civil rights attorney, son of a woman who once cleaned courthouse floors and grandson of a man who'd been denied the right to vote until he was 72. Elijah had spent his life in silence, not because he was afraid to speak, but because he knew the weight of listening. He had heard too many stories carved out of grief, too many names buried under the silence of injustice. Years ago, he had sat in a courtroom not as a lawyer, but as a defendant, falsely accused, barely 18. That day, a different judge had looked down on him with contempt and sentenced him to 2 years for a crime he hadn't committed. He survived, that he studied. And when he came back, he didn't return for revenge, he returned for the truth. Today, Elijah was in that courtroom for a case that should have been simple. A young single mother wrongfully evicted, her landlord manipulating documents, threatening her with homelessness. Elijah had taken the case pro bono. But before any arguments could even be made, Judge Langston made her opinion clear. Not on the case, but on Elijah. I've seen your kind try to play lawyer before, she said with a smirk. Emotional appeals and no legal grounding. Gasps and murmurs rippled across the courtroom. Elijah said nothing. He simply turned to the young mother beside him and gently placed a reassuring hand on the table. His calm was infuriating to her. And wipe that smug expression off your face, she barked. You're not impressing anyone here, Mr. Brooks. But something shifted. A bailiff entered quietly through the side door. Then another. 2 men in plain suits followed, standing at the back. They didn't sit. They watched. Judge Langston noticed them. Her voice faltered, barely. Elijah glanced at his watch. 2 minutes left. The courtroom's rhythm had been broken. A new tension filled the space, unspoken, but thick with anticipation. Judge Langston cleared her throat and forced a scoff. Unless you plan to actually argue law, Mr. Brooks, I suggest you take your little show somewhere else. The 2 men at the back stepped forward. A U.S. Marshal badge glinted under the fluorescent lights. The lead marshal held out a folder and spoke, not to Elijah, but to the judge. Meredith Langston, you are under federal investigation for bribery, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations under Title 18. Her face paled. What? The bailiffs didn't move. They knew. The courtroom was frozen. Elijah stood, slow and deliberate, that he reached into his briefcase. Not for a legal pad, but for a sealed document. This, he said softly, is a sworn affidavit from 2 whistleblowers. Inside your chambers. I filed it 3 days ago. Today was your final hearing. As the marshal stepped toward the bench, the room that once echoed with her scorn was now silent with awe. Judge Langston's voice, once sharp and unchallenged, crumbled. You set me up, she spat. Elijah shook his head. You set yourself up years ago. I just believed someone should finally answer to the law, even if they wear the robe. One of the bailiffs, a younger black man who had been silently humiliated under Langston's tenure, lowered his gaze to Elijah. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, gratitude. Langston was let out, handcuffed. The same hallway she'd marched through with authority now echoed with a very different rhythm. And Elijah? He sat back down. Now, he said calmly, turning to the courtroom, shall we begin the hearing? The eviction case was won. But that day, something larger shifted. A quiet message spread, through whispers in courtrooms, through legal circles and coffee shop conversations. The system doesn't only punish the powerless. Sometimes, it listens to the brave. Elijah didn't celebrate. He didn't need to. Justice wasn't a performance. It was a duty. One his mother had dreamed of. One his grandfather had been denied. And though racism hadn't ended that day, it had been met with something stronger, courage wrapped in silence, truth delivered in patience, and justice walking on its own 2 feet. If this story stirred something in you, don't scroll past it. Let it mean something. Share it for the young man wrongly accused, for the mother who never got her hearing, for the judge who thought she was untouchable until justice wore a different face. Subscribe if you believe the world needs more moments like this. And remember, be the reason someone still believes in goodness. Start today.